Hi everyone and welcome to your summer homework. So as you may have heard through the grapevine and from your subject teachers, the summer homework is on an entirely new topic to you lot. So the new topic area is psychopathology, otherwise known as mental illness. So the topic itself is rather a large one, whereby we look at several different disorders, kind of the causes from them and their treatments. But prior to getting to that point, there is a whole section which we're going to do together as part of the summer homework, which is a brief introduction to the individual disorders and their symptoms. So this is section number 1, where I'm going to kind of guide you through kind of what you would see in an individual who has, for example, got a phobia or somebody who is depressed. So that's the whole first section, looking in a lot of detail at kind of what characterises those individual mental illnesses. So depression, OCD, and phobic disorders. And then the second part of this video, which is the biggest part of this video, or the lesson rather, the videos are, there are 4 different videos for you to work through in total, but this just makes kind of one big lesson, and this is all of your summer homework, so it's all got to be completed. But the second section, or the second chunk to this summer homework, is defining abnormality. So in total, you're going to work your way through 4 different definitions of abnormality. So as I said, there are 4 different videos, and there's also a Prezi, which you will see the link to on the website. Obviously, you've been directed through the website to get to this video anyway. Everything's really structured. Everything's kind of in the order that you must go through it. So, like I said, the main purpose of the summer homework is to introduce you to those different disorders and allow you to kind of get a feel for the characteristics and the specific symptoms, and then the main bulk is going to be these definitions of abnormality. Now, as I just made reference to, there are several different videos here. Now, what I would just recommend that you do is take your time with this task. It is rather a large one. I wouldn't recommend that you do it all in one go, because if you do it all in one go, it's likely that you're going to kind of lose focus, you're going to lose a little bit of concentration, and we don't want really that to happen, because you need to know each of these definitions in as much detail as the next one. They're all as valuable to your knowledge as each other, and they're all as likely to come up on an exam. So what I would probably recommend is that you do the introduction to the symptoms first and foremost, and maybe some exam questions that go with it, and then take the definitions maybe 1 or 2 at a time. You will see that as I go through these individual videos, there are tasks built in. So there are exam questions that we're going to cover with you. You should also have a pack of miniature essays, so 8-mark essay plans, and a big A3 sheet. So it's about consolidating your learning as you are going through each of these little sections of the lesson or of the homework, and not trying to blast it all at once. Now, one thing that is very, very important, and you probably need to write this somewhere onto your booklet initially before we get going, is that there is a little bit of an error in a couple of these videos. Because I made the bulk of these videos last year when we were teaching to an AS specification, you might occasionally hear me make reference to a 12-mark essay. Now, obviously, you no longer do 12-mark essays. You are completing the A-level programme. So you won't be answering a 12-mark essay. What you are likely to do on this area is a 16-mark essay. Now, that 16-mark essay could be on one of the definitions of abnormality, but it is unlikely. For 16 marks, you're probably going to be asked to discuss 2 or more definitions of abnormality, or you might get asked to discuss 1 definition of abnormality and apply it to a stimulus. But in any case, any reference to 12-mark questions, it's not an oversight on my part, but it is kind of due to the fact that we'd recorded all the videos last year when we were still writing 12-mark essays. So I think I've eliminated most of them, but if you see reference to 12 marks, please ignore it. It it should be 16 marks, but the way that you answer the questions is exactly the same. As I've said here on the screen, it doesn't change the content at all. It is literally the number of marks. So that's just kind of one thing that you need to be aware of before we get going. Now, the other thing that you need to kind of bear in mind is you might get a bit kind of tired and you might get a bit drained working your way through this homework. But the final video is probably the most important one. All of the videos are important because they give you content, but that final one there is actually exam skills. So it teaches you how to prepare for a 16-mark essay. Now, I don't know whether all teachers will have passed this message on. I know I've told my classes, but I'm not entirely sure kind of whether or not this has been clarified with everyone, that you will have a 16-mark potluck essay in the first week back after you return to us in the summer. So it is very much important that you have watched that final video clip. You understand how to plan that one of those 16 markers, you understand how to do it, because none of this content, and I need to really emphasize that to you, none of this will be taught in class, okay? So this will all just be assessed without any refresher, without any kind of teacher input. So it is really important that you watch that final video. Now, the other thing that I'm just going to mention to you as well, before we get stuck into the symptoms, is that this area of psychology tends to be very, very interesting for a lot of students. I mean, I personally find it one of the most interesting areas. However, kind of like the restrictions put on our course mean that we can't really do it justice. We can't teach it in as much detail as what we would like to in some cases. So because I'm very much aware of that, and because I'm very much giving you a very superficial amount of information, just enough for you to kind of get through your exam, what I have done is I've made sure that there are additional bits of information available to you on the Moodle page. So there are additional articles, there are some extra video clips. So what is contained in my videos in these lessons is everything that you need in order to pass your A-level. However, if you are more interested and if you do want to find out more about psychopathology, which I have no doubt some of you will want to, please don't be afraid to access those additional resources that we have added to the Moodle screen. They're there for you to use, but you don't necessarily need to include them in any of your answers. These videos are enough for you to access good solid marks on the A-level paper. So first video, all we're looking at is the introduction to the disorders. Now there's a little tiny error on page 2 of your booklet. It says in your booklet that we're going to be looking at 4 different disorders. That's actually an error, and it's 3 disorders in total. Those 3 disorders, as you can see on page 2 and 3, are obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD, depressive illnesses, and phobias. Now, for each of those 3 disorders, you've got to know several symptoms that are associated with each of the different conditions. These symptoms tend to be split up into different categories. So we've got behavioural symptoms, emotional symptoms, and cognitive symptoms. And you can see on page 2 that there's some blank spaces for you to give a little definition of what each of those are. In the exam, you could be asked to list these symptoms in reference to those different categories, so it's important you understand how they break down. So behavioural characteristics are as follows. These are things that the individual does. It is behaviours, it is their actions. Emotional characteristics are things that the individual feels. Obviously, we know what emotions are. It's any feeling that you're experiencing. So behavioural is your actions, the things that your illness makes you do. Your emotional characteristics are the things that your illness makes you feel. So the cognitive characteristics, we should know this one already, are the things that the individual thinks. Remember, for each of those different categories of characteristics, you have got to be able to apply those to 3 different disorders, and like I said, in the exam it might be worth 2 marks. So What we're going to do now is we're going to work our way through OCD, depression and phobias, and you need to use this information that I'm presenting to you in the next few slides to fill in each of those little boxes. So for each one we've got behavioural, emotional and cognitive symptoms. So the first one that we're going to start with, because we're corresponding with the booklet, is OCD, okay? And we need to obviously know what the behavioural, emotional and cognitive symptoms are of this particular disorder. Now, OCD says here affects people differently, but usually it causes a particular pattern of thoughts and behaviours. Now at the moment these symptoms are not categorised, which we're going to do in a while, but you can see that the pattern for somebody suffering from OCD has got 4 main steps. Firstly, it begins with obsession. So these are unwanted, intrusive and often distressing images that enter your mind. That then creates anxiety, which is intense feelings of distress and fear a lot of the time. Compulsion are the behaviours that you carry out as a result of that anxiety, because those compulsions will then lead to, we can see here, the temporary relief. So for OCD, they are trapped in this cycle. Obsessions leads to anxiety, the anxiety leads to compulsion, and those compulsions for most people will result in a temporary relief. So we need to know how those symptoms match up to our 3 categories. So I want you to complete now your little table at the bottom of page 2 with the information that I'm giving you here. So unwanted, intrusive and often distressing thoughts. As we said, they provoke a feeling of intense anxiety, and that results in repetitive behaviours. And then we've got at the bottom, it's possible to just have obsessive thoughts or just have compulsions, but most people with OCD will experience both. So how does that information match to our little table? So the unwanted, intrusive and often distressing thoughts are clearly the cognitive symptoms, okay? So you need to jot that down into your little table, okay? It's all to do with thinking, it's unwanted thoughts, that's therefore cognitive symptom. The next bit on anxiety, it's feelings, it's emotions. So distress and anxiety are clearly the emotional symptoms. And then for behavioural, we've got the compulsions, the repetitive acts that you do yourself, because that will give you a sense of temporary relief. Now for OCD, we've got the definitions, but we also might want to add in some examples. So an example of a behavioural symptom, a compulsion that they might carry out, would be excessive hand washing or switching lights on and off, etc., etc. An emotional cognitive example would be thinking that germs are going to kill you. Or I know somebody who's actually got this thought themselves, thinking things like their family's going to die if they don't switch off the lights, or something bad's going to happen if they've got the volume of the television on a odd number or something along those lines. So the cognition is the really kind of like unwanted thought processes that just pop in there. And then lastly, we've got emotional symptoms, and those emotional symptoms are normally feelings of embarrassment and shame because of the compulsions. They've got to carry out those compulsions, and that therefore can often lead to as well unwanted emotional experiences. So that's the 3 symptoms, or 3 categories of symptoms for OCD. Behavioural is compulsive behaviour. Emotional is feelings of anxiety and distress and the embarrassment and shame experienced as a result of those compulsions. Cognitive, unwanted, intrusive thoughts such as germs will kill me, my family's going to die. Now if you do want to find out more, you can follow these links here, okay? There's PowerPoint versions of all of these videos, so if you do want to go to those links, simply open up the PowerPoint and click on the links and it'll take you to the web pages, okay, where I got this information from. However, we do need to move on to the next disorder. Like I said, all that extra stuff you can do in your own time. So now if we just turn over to page 3, we're going to have a little look at depression. Now, before we get going with depression, I do think it's very important for you to understand that depression, as I've put here, is more than feeling unhappy or fed up for a few days. When we teach psychopathology, we have some students who are desperate to kind of like diagnose themselves, and we often have students thinking that they are experiencing depression. So please bear in mind that everybody goes through periods of feeling down or periods of feeling unhappy. Yeah, we might have a couple of days where you're a bit down in the dumps because something's happened, or you're a bit stressed out or a bit sad, or something in your life causes you to feel negative. If you are depressed, it does not just last for a few days. People with depression, it lasts for weeks, months, years, and it's persistent. It does not go away. Often as well, what you need to bear in mind is that people with depression are often just kind of told to snap out of it and get on with it. Depression really isn't like that. You can't just cheer yourself up. There is a fundamental reason, normally to do with your biology, that is causing you to experience those symptoms. So just please bear that in mind. It might be a good idea for you to write that at the top of page 3 above your table. So now then, what we're going to have a look at is what mind suggests are the major symptoms of depression. Now, there are absolutely loads of them, and you're not expected to know all of them for your exam. Some overarching things that people say about being depressed are what I've got on the screen at the moment. So a constant low mood, hopelessness, frustration, so getting angry with yourself that you can't get yourself out of that rut, and feeling like you could cry at any moment. Also, people with depression regularly report that they feel really tired all of the time, and that they also just don't feel anything. A lot of people wrongly assume that feeling depressed is feeling sad all of the time, and it isn't. Some people who are depressed become so detached and so kind of like down on themselves that they don't even have the ability to experience upset anymore. It's just a numbness. It's just kind of like no emotion, and you're in this little black hole. So they're just overarching things. Now, what we've got here on the screen are the emotional symptoms on the left hand side. So emotional symptoms, remember we said these are things that you feel. So you might feel down, upset, tearful, restless, guilty, worthless, empty, isolated, no pleasure, a sense of unreality, no confidence, and so on and so forth. All you need to do for me there, please, is add 4 of those to your table, and that will be quite sufficient. Moving on to the right hand side, we've got the behavioural symptoms. So these are things that the depressed person will do or not do in some cases. So things that they won't do is that they won't engage in social activities, they won't go to work a lot of the time, they won't get dressed, they won't wash, they won't have sexual relationships anymore. So they're all things that they will no longer do. Other things that they do engage in are possible self-harming or suicidal behaviours. They might start engaging in substance abuse, so alcohol, drugs, smoking more. They might eat too much, or they might not eat at all. Like I say, the behavioural symptoms of depression are so wide ranging. So now again, please add 4 of those to your little table. And then lastly, we've got the cognitive symptoms. Now the cognitive symptoms for someone with depression are really easy. When you are depressed, you can't snap out of it because your negative belief system dictates that you have got a negative view of yourself and also the world around you, and there's not a single thing that you can do to change that. So we've got negative expectations for the future, negative expectations about you. So I am useless, I am ugly, I am worthless, I am stupid, etc. And as a result of that, everyone hates me, I'm never going to be able to get a job, nobody's ever going to take me seriously, I might as well stay inside, etc. Now for someone with depression, most of the time we say those cognitive symptoms are irrational. They are not grounded in any reality. So for example, someone can wake up with depression one day and their life is perfect. Let's say they're married, they've got children, they've got a good job, nice house, nice car, and then all of a sudden they've got these negative views about themselves. They are totally worthless. Now anybody looking in on that can see that that is totally irrational. The depressed person cannot. They cannot see past that. So now then, let's get all of that written in. Emotional, behavioural and cognitive symptoms. And again, if you want to find out more, there is that little link in the top left hand corner that you might want to follow. I've gone to the Mind website for my symptoms. If you want to find out a little bit more, there's some real life stories on the NHS website. So now then, moving in to our last disorder. Again, we need to split these symptoms up into our 3 different categories. A phobia, it is worth saying, is not just a simple fear. A lot of us are afraid of something, but it's not a phobia. Okay, so as I've just already said to you there, a phobia is not just a fear of something. We can all be afraid of something, but a phobia has a serious impact on your daily activities. It will stop you from doing certain things. Also, it might then cause another disorder. So you might end up with an anxiety condition or with a depressive illness as a result of your phobia. So you can see here I've already put a link between what it says on the screen to the behavioural symptoms. So the major behavioural symptom of somebody with a phobia is avoidance. They are so afraid and so phobic of a particular stimulus or environment or object that they will avoid coming into contact with that on a daily basis. So fear of spiders might result in you not being able to go outside or spend long periods of time outside. If you've got a phobia of germs, then you might avoid kind of like unsanitary conditions. It leads to total and utter avoidance. The emotional symptoms of phobias are all listed here for you. They're all fears, so clearly they are all emotional affects. Fear of losing control, fear of fainting, feelings of dread, fear of dying. It really is that dramatic, it's that intense. So they cannot stand that idea of losing control, and they do think that if they come into contact with that phobic object, that they will ultimately die in a lot of cases. So it is quite intense emotional experiences. So the only thing that we've got left to fill in there is cognitive, and we know that cognitive is thinking patterns. So for these people, it is irrational beliefs about an object or a situation. They resist anybody who will try to give them a rational argument in response. So for example, someone with a fear of flying won't believe it is the safest form of transport. Even though it is, they will refuse kind of like any of the statistics or the figures, because they're totally grounded in those irrational beliefs. So as I said to you, you might want to write on just above that table that it's worth noting that a phobia is not a fear. They prevent you from living your normal life, and that is going to be very, very important to you for the next part of the lesson. So that now should leave you with all of pages 2 and 3 filled in. Like I say, if you want to do any more reading around these disorders and getting some real life examples of them, visit any of the links that I've listed at the bottom of the folder. This section's now done, so if and when you are ready, turn it over onto page 4 and we're going to have a look at our first definition.